Hey everyone, my name is Michael Brennan, and I never thought I'd be sitting here telling this story. For the longest time, I couldn't even say these words out loud without breaking down. But I've come to realize that sharing what happened might help someone else spot the warning signs I missed. Maybe it will save a life. Maybe it will save yours. That I was born and raised in a small town in Maine, the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do. My parents, Dad was a high school chemistry teacher. Mom ran the local library, raised me with strong values: honesty, hard work, and loyalty above all else. I excelled academically, eventually earning a scholarship to MIT, where I studied computer science. After graduation, I landed a job as a software engineer at a cybersecurity firm in Boston. My life was comfortable, if somewhat predictable. I had a nice apartment in Cambridge, close enough to the Charles River that I could go running every morning before work. I had good friends, mostly fellow engineers and college buddies. We'd meet up for beers on Fridays, talk tech and sports, occasionally try to set each other up on dates that almost always ended in amusing disaster stories. I wasn't unhappy, but something was missing. I wanted what my parents had, that partnership that made life's challenges more manageable and its joys more meaningful. I met Sarah at my friend Dave's 4th of July barbecue 6 years ago. It was one of those perfect summer days, clear blue sky, temperature in the high 70s, just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. Dave had invited a mix of his work friends and college buddies, promising great food and better company. "Mike, come meet Sarah," Dave called out as I was flipping burgers. She just started at my wife's financial firm. I turned around, and there she was. Sarah Winters, 5'6", with chestnut hair that fell in soft waves just past her shoulders, striking green eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and a laugh that made you want to say something funny just to hear it again. "Dave says you're some kind of computer genius," she said, extending her hand. "I'll try not to bore you with financial advisor talk. Only if you promise not to ask me to fix your printer," I replied, and she laughed, that laugh that would eventually become both my favorite sound and, years later, the soundtrack to my nightmares. That we spent the entire afternoon talking. Sarah had grown up in Connecticut, the daughter of a surgeon and an art professor. She'd studied economics at Wellesley and had just earned her CFP certification. She was vibrant, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking questions that showed she actually understood the technical challenges I was describing. "I've always found cybersecurity fascinating," she told me as we walked along. The edge of Dave's property, the sky turning pink with sunset. The constant chess game between security experts and hackers. It's not so different from financial planning. Anticipating moves, protecting assets, thinking several steps ahead. By the time fireworks lit up the night sky, I'd gathered my courage to ask for her number. Our first date was 3 days later. Dinner at a small Italian place in the North End where the owners still greeted customers by name, and the wine list was scribbled on a chalkboard. Sarah wore a navy blue dress that made her eyes look like emeralds. She ordered in perfect Italian, which she'd learned during a semester abroad in Florence. "I believe in immersing yourself completely in experiences," she explained. "Half measures are for people afraid of living." That night, walking her to her door, I felt like I'd known her my entire life. Our courtship was a whirlwind of weekend getaways to coastal Maine, concerts at the symphony, and quiet evenings cooking together in my apartment. Sarah introduced me to fine wines and modern art. I taught her how to code simple programs and the rules of fantasy football. We complemented each other perfectly. Her spontaneity balanced my methodical nature. My patience tempered her occasional impulsiveness. After dating for 2 years, I proposed during a hiking trip to Acadia National Park. We'd reached the summit of Cadillac Mountain just as the sun was rising, the first place in the United States to see daylight each morning. "I want every day to start with you," I told her, presenting the vintage emerald ring that had belonged to my grandmother. "Will you marry me?" "Yes, 1,000 times yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at a historic lighthouse on the Massachusetts coast. Only 60 guests, close friends and family. Sarah's father walked her down the aisle. Her mother read a poem by Pablo Neruda. My best friend Dave gave a toast that had everyone alternating between laughter and tears. Sarah wore a simple silk gown and carried wildflowers. When we exchanged vows, I truly believed we would honor them until death parted us. I never imagined she would be plotting that death within a few short years. After a honeymoon in New Zealand, Sarah's choice, as she'd always wanted to see the landscapes from The Lord of the Rings, we settled into married life. We bought a Victorian-style house in a suburb outside Boston, close enough for our commutes, but with enough yard space for the golden retriever puppy we adopted and named Cooper. The first 3 years of our marriage were everything I'd hoped for. We established routines and traditions. Sunday brunches where we'd solve the New York Times crossword together, summer weekends spent sailing on the bay, Christmas vacations with both our families at a cabin in Vermont. Sarah excelled at her financial advisory firm, building a loyal client base and earning recognition for her innovative investment strategies. I received a promotion to lead software architect at my company, developing security systems for financial institutions. That my new position required longer hours and occasional travel, but the pay increase meant we could start saving for our dream of traveling the world together after early retirement. Sarah was incredibly supportive of my career advancement, often bringing dinner to the office when I worked late, sending encouraging texts during my presentations, and always greeting me with a smile when I got home, no matter the hour. "I'm so proud of you," she'd say, massaging my shoulders after particularly long days. "All this hard work is building our future." We renovated the house together, argued good-naturedly about paint colors and furniture placement, compromised on a style that blended her modern aesthetic with my preference for classic comfort. We planted a vegetable garden in the backyard that Cooper routinely trampled despite our best efforts to train him otherwise. We hosted dinner parties for colleagues and game nights for friends. We discussed having children, agreeing to wait another year or two until our careers were more established. I thought we were building something real, something that would last. Each night, falling asleep with Sarah in my arms, I felt like the luckiest man alive. "I love you beyond words," I would whisper as she drifted off to sleep. "More than yesterday, less than tomorrow," she would respond, a phrase that had become our private mantra. Little did I know what was brewing beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life. Little did I suspect that the woman who kissed me goodbye each morning was already contemplating how to ensure that, someday soon, I would never come home again. The first sign that something wasn't quite right came about 4 months ago, though in retrospect, there were subtle changes even earlier that I'd dismissed or rationalized away. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. The air had that crispness that signals summer's end in New England. I'd come home earlier than expected. A server crash had forced us to postpone a client demo, and found Sarah in our home office, phone pressed to her ear. "We need to be careful," she was saying, her voice low and intense. "He's not an idiot." When she noticed me standing in the doorway, she visibly startled, quickly ending the call with, "I'll have those projections to you tomorrow." "But, client troubles?" I asked casually, dropping my laptop bag on the sofa. "Just this new guy, very demanding," she replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Wants daily updates on his portfolio. You're home early. Server issues. Who needs technology, right?" I joked, giving her a quick kiss. I noticed her phone screen was dark. She must have ended the call immediately upon seeing me. "I'm going to take Cooper for a walk," she said, slipping past me. "Don't wait up for dinner. I'll grab something on my way back." That was unlike her. Sarah usually loved cooking together on nights when I got home at a reasonable hour. But I didn't think much of it. Everyone has off days, and her job could be stressful. Still, something about her expression, a flicker of what looked almost like fear when she saw me in the doorway, lodged in my subconscious. After that day, I noticed Sarah had started taking most of her calls in another room or outside on the porch, which was unusual for her. She'd always been the type to pace around the living room while on business calls, gesturing animatedly even though the person on the other end couldn't see her. When I'd walk into a room while she was on the phone, she'd quickly end the conversation or switch to vague professional platitudes. "Just client confidentiality," she explained when I eventually commented on it. "The firm is cracking down after some information leak scandal at our competitor. Better safe than sorry." It made sense given her job handling sensitive financial data. I worked in cybersecurity. After all, I understood the importance of discretion. Still, there was something different about her tone during these calls, softer, more intimate than her usual professional voice. Then came the late nights. Sarah had always worked standard business hours, with the occasional evening client meeting that she'd tell me about in advance. But suddenly, she was coming home well after her office would have closed, often smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. Not overpowering, just a trace, the kind that lingers after a hug or sitting close to someone during a conversation. The Dixon account is in trouble, she'd explain, or the Williams family needed emergency financial planning after their father's diagnosis. Always plausible reasons, always delivered with just the right mix of professional concern and mild annoyance at the inconvenience that I found myself checking her firm's social media occasionally, looking for evidence of these client events. Sometimes I'd find it, a photo of a client appreciation dinner, Sarah visible in the background, but other times there was nothing. One night in October, after she came home past 11 for the third time that week, I asked if everything was okay at work. Just busy season, she said, kicking off her heels. Year-end tax planning has everyone scrambling. Why? Do you not believe me? There was an edge to her voice I hadn't heard before. Defensive, almost accusatory. Of course I believe you, I replied, taken aback. I'm just concerned you're working too hard. She softened immediately. I'm sorry, you're right. I'm just stressed. This will calm down after the new year. She kissed me and headed upstairs to shower. That night, while she was sleeping, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message notification briefly lit up the screen. Missing you already. Same time tomorrow. It was from a contact listed as James Dixon. The Dixon account, the troubled one she'd mentioned multiple times that I lay awake for hours, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. Sarah shifted in her sleep, murmuring something I couldn't make out, her expression peaceful. How could I doubt her? We'd built this life together, trusted each other completely. I was being paranoid, letting insecurity get the best of me. The next morning, I casually mentioned I might drop by her office for lunch. Don't, she said quickly, then softened her tone. I mean, I'll be in client meetings all day. Rain check. I agreed, but something cold settled in my stomach. That weekend, Sarah announced she needed to go into the office to catch up on paperwork. It was the first time in our marriage she'd worked on a Saturday. When she left, I noticed she was wearing perfume and had styled her hair. Unusual for a day of solo paperwork. 4 hours later, driving back from a hardware store run, I impulsively detoured past her office building. The parking lot was nearly empty, and her car was nowhere to be seen. I called her cell. How's the paperwork going? I asked, fighting to keep my tone casual. Ugh, endless, she sighed, background noise suggesting she was indeed in an office environment. I'm drowning in tax loss harvesting forms. Sounds rough. Want me to bring you lunch? No. Again, that too quick response. I mean, I already ordered delivery. But thank you, that's sweet. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long while, the cold reality of deception settling over me. Either her car was parked somewhere else nearby, or she wasn't at the office at all. Both possibilities led to uncomfortable conclusions. The next sign that something was seriously amiss came when her phone password changed. We'd always had an open phone policy, not because we snooped on each other, but because we had nothing to hide. I'd use her phone to order takeout if mine was charging. She'd use mine to take photos if hers was out of battery. It was the casual intimacy of two people who trusted each other completely. One evening, I picked up her phone to check the weather forecast. It was closer than my own, only to find it locked with a new passcode. When did you change your password? I asked, keeping my tone light. Oh, company policy, she said without looking up from her laptop. New security protocols for all employees handling client financial data. Mandatory password changes every 30 days, no sharing, all that jazz. Again, a perfectly reasonable explanation. I worked in cybersecurity. Such protocols were standard practice. But why hadn't she mentioned it earlier? And why did she seem so unbothered by disrupting our usual openness? I can give you the new code if you need to use my phone, she offered, finally looking up. No. That's okay, I said. Probably. Good practice for both of us to be more security conscious. She smiled, seemingly relieved. Exactly. I thought you'd understand, being in the security field yourself. That night, I updated my own phone password too, not out of petty retaliation, but because a terrible suspicion was taking root in my mind. I needed to protect my own information until I could make sense of what was happening. The most disturbing change, however, was how interested Sarah suddenly became in my life insurance policy. We'd set it up years ago, shortly after buying our house, standard practice for a married couple with a mortgage. I had a policy that would pay out $1 million in the event of my death. Sarah had a similar one, naming me as beneficiary. We'd filed the paperwork and rarely thought about it again, apart from paying the annual premiums. But in November, Sarah brought it up over dinner. "I was thinking about our life insurance today," she said, twirling pasta around her fork. "One of my clients just lost her husband suddenly. Heart attack at 42. Their coverage was inadequate, and now she's struggling to keep their house." "That's terrible," I said genuinely. "Poor woman." It made me realize our policies might be outdated. "Your income has increased substantially since we set them up. We should probably update yours, at least." "How much were you thinking?" $2 million. "Would be more appropriate now," she said, her gaze steady. "Maybe more. We have the house, our investment portfolios, potential future educational costs if we have children, and inflation, of course." Her reasoning seemed logical. Our assets had grown, our lifestyle had improved, and prudent financial planning meant preparing for worst-case scenarios. She was a financial advisor. After all, this was her area of expertise. "I'll look into it," I promised. The next day, an email from Sarah was waiting in my inbox. She'd already researched options and included links to several insurance providers offering enhanced coverage. Her efficiency would have been admirable if it hadn't sent a chill down my spine. Over the next few weeks, Sarah mentioned the insurance repeatedly, each time with a seemingly valid reason. An article she'd read about underinsured families, a client's positive experience with a particular provider, statistics about the rising costs of end-of-life care. "I just want to be protected if anything happens to you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't imagine losing you and having to worry about money on top of grief." Her performance was so convincing that I almost abandoned my suspicions. Almost. Then came the moment that transformed vague unease into concrete fear. I was working from home one day while Sarah was at the office. I needed our previous year's tax return for a mortgage refinance application. Sarah kept all our important documents in a filing cabinet in her home office. She'd always been the more organized one in our marriage. While searching through the files, I came across a folder labeled Michael Medical. Inside were printouts of my medical records, not just recent visits, but comprehensive documentation going back years. There were highlighted sections on various routine tests, with particular attention to kidney and liver function results. This made no sense. There was no reason for Sarah to have compiled these records, let alone study them in such detail. I wasn't seriously ill. I had no chronic conditions that warranted monitoring. And why highlight liver and kidney metrics specifically? As I flipped through the pages, a loose sheet fell out, a printout from a medical website describing how certain toxins affect the body, with particular emphasis on symptoms that could mimic common illnesses. Several passages were underlined, including one that read, "Gradual poisoning may present as nonspecific symptoms including fatigue, hair loss, cognitive difficulties, and gastrointestinal distress, often attributed to stress, aging, or minor viral infections by unsuspecting physicians." My blood ran cold as I connected this to my recent health complaints: persistent fatigue, digestive issues, unexplained hair thinning that my doctor had indeed attributed to work stress, and approaching middle age that I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it, my hands shaking. That night, I barely slept, watching Sarah's peaceful breathing beside me and wondering what was really going on behind her closed eyelids. Was it possible that my loving wife was actually trying to? No, I couldn't even complete the thought. The next day, I called my doctor's office and scheduled a full physical examination, requesting comprehensive toxicology screening, just to be safe. I told Sarah it was just a routine checkup, part of my company's wellness program. She seemed completely supportive, even offering to come with me. "That's okay," I said. "It's just standard stuff. No need for both of us to waste time sitting in a waiting room." "If you're sure," she replied, kissing my cheek. "Let me know if they find anything to worry about." The genuine concern in her voice made me doubt myself again. How could this woman, who had held me through my father's death, who knew every vulnerable part of me, possibly want to harm me? But then I remembered the medical records, the highlighted poison symptoms, the phone calls and hushed tones, the unexplained absences, and the sudden fixation on increasing my life insurance. Something was deeply, terribly wrong, and I needed to find out what it was before it was too late. The revelation that confirmed my worst fears came on a Thursday evening in early December. Sarah had told me she would be attending her firm's holiday dinner, likely running late. I had planned to work from home, finishing a complex security algorithm that required uninterrupted focus. Around 6 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "Dude, didn't you say Sarah had her company party tonight? Just walked past Fleming's and didn't see any private event happening there." Fleming's was the steakhouse where Sarah had told me her firm was holding their holiday celebration. I texted back, "You sure? Second floor private dining room maybe." Dave's response came quickly, asked the hostess. "No corporate events tonight." My stomach tightened into a knot. I replied with a casual thanks and a made-up explanation about miscommunication, not wanting to worry my friend, but internally, alarm bells were blaring. This wasn't a small inconsistency. This was an outright lie about her whereabouts. I considered calling her, but what would I say? Instead, I decided to use the evening alone to search for answers. I started with our shared computer, though I expected little. Sarah was too smart to leave obvious digital footprints. Still, people get comfortable, they get careless, especially in spaces they consider safe. For over an hour, I found nothing unusual in our documents, photos, or browser history. Then I remembered Sarah sometimes used her tablet for personal matters, rather than our shared laptop. The tablet was password protected, but I knew her pattern. She used variations of significant dates combined with initials. I tried several combinations before hitting on her mother's birthday, followed by what I assumed were her mother's initials, MW. The tablet unlocked, revealing dozens of apps neatly organized into folders. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I noticed an app simply labeled Notes that I didn't recognize, not the standard Notes application that came with the device. That I opened it to find another password prompt. 3 failed attempts, and the app would lock completely, potentially alerting Sarah. I thought carefully. For important passwords, Sarah often used phrases rather than codes, lines from favorite poems or books. I typed in a line from Pablo Neruda that had been read at our wedding. "I love you," without knowing how. Access denied. That I tried the name of her childhood street combined with her first pet's name, Maple Shadow. Access denied. One more chance. I took a deep breath and typed James Dixon, the name of her supposed problem client, from the text message I'd glimpsed. The app opened, revealing folders labeled by month. The most recent folder contained what appeared to be journal entries, but they weren't reflections on daily life or work challenges. They were love letters, passionate, intimate messages addressed to Jay. I count the minutes until we can be together properly. Living this double life is exhausting, but it will all be worth it when we're finally free. Just a few more months of patience, my love. Sometimes I catch myself staring at him while he sleeps, wondering how I ever thought what we had was love. What I feel for you burns hotter than anything I've experienced before. It consumes me. The plan is progressing well. He suspects nothing. His health is mysteriously declining exactly as expected. The doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication. Today, perfect for explaining away any cognitive symptoms as they intensify. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely continue scrolling, but I forced myself to read more, needing to understand the full scope of the betrayal. The earliest entries dated back nearly a year, documenting the beginnings of an affair with someone named James, whom she had apparently met at an investment conference in Chicago. What had started as flirtation had evolved into elaborate plans for a future together, plans that hinged on my elimination and the collection of life insurance. Money. That I found detailed notes about dosages, symptoms to watch for, and ways to avoid detection. Sarah had been systematically poisoning me for months, carefully increasing the amounts to mimic a gradual health decline that would appear natural. The substance she was using, thallium, was particularly insidious, tasteless, odorless, and with symptoms that could be attributed to dozens of common conditions. That I felt physically ill reading her clinical observations of my deteriorating health, dated entries noting increased fatigue, noticeable weight loss, cognitive confusion during complex conversations, and hair loss accelerating. She recorded these details the way a scientist might document an experiment, with no emotion beyond occasional satisfaction at particularly promising developments. The most recent entry, dated just 2 days prior, read, Dr. Campbell seems concerned about his symptoms but remains puzzled. Has ordered more tests but doesn't suspect poisoning. Perfect. Jay thinks we should accelerate the timeline given the upcoming holidays. Fewer people will question a health crisis during this stressful season. I've adjusted his dosage accordingly. Freedom is so close I can taste it. I carefully took photos of the most incriminating entries using my own phone, then meticulously restored the tablet exactly as I'd found it. I needed evidence, but I couldn't risk Sarah discovering that I knew. That same evening, while continuing my search for answers, I found a hidden compartment in Sarah's jewelry box, a false bottom that concealed a small USB drive. Plugging it into my laptop revealed hundreds of emails between Sarah and James, saved as PDF files. The exchanges weren't just romantic. They detailed their plan with disturbing precision. I've been researching untraceable methods, James had written in an email dated 8 months ago. Thallium is ideal, mimics the symptoms of many illnesses, gradually builds up in the system, and most doctors won't test for heavy metal poisoning unless they have specific reason to suspect it. With your husband's recent stress levels and family history of heart problems, no one will question a sudden health crisis. Sarah's reply was equally chilling. I've already sourced it through that connection we discussed. Small amounts in his protein shakes to start. He drinks one every morning after his run. The perfect delivery system since the powder masks any possible taste. I'll monitor and adjust as needed. As I read through their correspondence, the full picture emerged. James Dixon wasn't a client. He was an investment banker Sarah had met at a conference, and they had been planning this for nearly 8 months. The emails detailed how they would collect on my insurance policy, sell our house, liquidate our investments, and disappear to start a new life in a country with no extradition treaty with the United States that I also discovered that Sarah had taken out an additional policy on me through a different company without my knowledge, using paperwork I had apparently signed, though I have no recollection of ever seeing those documents. She had likely forged my signature or slipped the papers into a stack of routine documents I'd signed without careful review, a devastating realization about the level of premeditation involved. The second policy is approved, she'd written to James 3 months ago. Another 1.5 million. Combined with the primary policy and our assets, we're looking at nearly 4 million total. More than enough for our fresh start. Further investigation revealed offshore accounts Sarah had established in the Cayman Islands, ready to receive transfers that wouldn't trigger regulatory scrutiny. She and James had researched properties in several countries, settling on a remote coastal villa in Bali as their ultimate destination. The most chilling discovery came when I found an encrypted folder containing a detailed timeline. Sarah had created a countdown calendar in a separate app on her tablet, which I accessed using the same password. It had dates marked for Final Dose and Freedom Day, just 3 weeks away. According to their plan, I would suffer a catastrophic health event shortly before Christmas, likely attributed to heart failure exacerbated by work stress and underlying health issues. James's last email, dated just days earlier, read, Everything is in place on my end. Tickets booked under our new names for January 10th. The contact will have our documents ready by the 5th. Just stick to the timeline we discussed. Try to ensure it happens at home rather than at a hospital. Much cleaner that way. Soon this will all be just an unpleasant memory on our way to paradise. Sarah had replied simply, 3 weeks until forever begins. I can hardly wait. As I sat in our home office, surrounded by evidence of my wife's elaborate plot to murder me, I felt a surreal detachment. This couldn't be real. The woman who had nursed me through bronchitis last winter, who remembered every anniversary with thoughtful gifts, who knew exactly how I liked my coffee. This same woman was systematically poisoning me while planning a new life with her lover, but the evidence was irrefutable. And when I thought back over the past months, my increasingly frequent stomach bugs, the unexplained fatigue, the hair coming out in my brush, the moments of mental fogginess that I'd attributed to overwork, it all made terrible sense. Meeting with the doctor the following morning confirmed everything. The toxicology screening I had requested revealed elevated levels of thallium in my system. Not yet lethal, but building steadily toward dangerous levels. When the doctor asked how I might have been exposed to such an unusual toxin, I made vague references to old plumbing in our house, promising to have it checked immediately. That evening, I faced the greatest acting challenge of my life. Sarah had returned from her fictitious company party full of fabricated stories about colleagues' drunken antics and the mediocre catering. I listened attentively, laughing at appropriate moments, all while knowing she had likely spent the evening with James, perhaps finalizing details of my demise. "You look tired," she commented, touching my face with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Are you feeling okay?" "Just a headache," I replied, the irony of her feigned concern nearly choking me. "Nothing serious. Take some of those pills Dr. Campbell prescribed," she suggested. "I'll bring you some water." "No," I said, perhaps too quickly. I already took something. I think I just need sleep." Later that night, unable to bear lying beside her, I went downstairs, ostensibly to watch TV because I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the darkness of our living room, contemplating how the person I had trusted most in the world had become my would-be murderer. The final confirmation came the following morning. I had been having strange symptoms for months: dizziness, nausea, hair loss that seemed excessive even for a man my age. My doctor had run tests but found nothing conclusive, suggesting it might be stress-related. Now I knew better. I called in sick to work, telling Sarah I had an important project to finish from home. She seemed momentarily concerned by the disruption to her routine, but quickly adapted. "I'll be home around the usual time," she said, kissing my forehead. "Don't work too hard. You need rest." "I've got my protein shake," I assured her, holding up the travel mug she'd prepared for me. "That should keep me going." After she left, I poured the contents into a sealed container rather than drinking it. When evening came, Sarah thought I was working late, but a meeting had been canceled. I came home to find her in our kitchen, carefully measuring something from a small, unmarked bottle into my protein shake powder. Her back was to the door, and she was so focused on getting the dosage precise that she didn't hear me enter. I stood, frozen, watching my wife poison my food with methodical precision. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, and I silently recorded several seconds of video before quietly retreating. I slipped out the front door and re-entered noisily, calling out, "Honey, I'm home," as if I'd just arrived. By the time I reached the kitchen, Sarah had hidden the bottle and was casually wiping down the counter. The protein powder container sat innocently on the shelf, its contents now laced with enough poison to continue my slow decline. "You're early," she said, her surprise quickly masked by a warm smile. "Dinner won't be ready for another hour." "The Johnson meeting was pushed to tomorrow," I explained, watching her face carefully. "Thought I'd come home and surprise you." "I'm glad you did," she replied, embracing me. Over her shoulder, I could see the edge of the small bottle peeking out from behind the flour canister where she'd hastily stashed it. That night, I didn't confront her. Instead, I took a sample of the protein powder to a private lab using a connection from a previous security job to expedite the analysis. The results confirmed what I already knew: elevated levels of thallium, introduced deliberately and recently. I now had irrefutable proof. My wife was trying to kill me for insurance, money, and a new life with her lover. The question was, what would I do about it? I knew I needed to act quickly but carefully. This wasn't just about saving my life anymore. It was about ensuring justice would be served. Sarah and James had meticulously planned my murder over many months. My response needed to be equally thorough if I wanted to hold them accountable. First, I stopped consuming anything at home. I disposed of my shakes when Sarah wasn't looking and pretended to drink the special tea she'd begun making for me every evening, a new delivery method she'd introduced after noting in her journal that the protein powder might not be working quickly enough. "It's an immunity booster," she'd explained with practiced concern. "Given how run down you've been lately, it should help your body fight whatever's going on." I would wait until she left the room, then pour the tea into a special container for later evidence collection, replacing it with regular tea I prepared in secret. I started eating only at work or from sealed packages I purchased myself and kept hidden in my office. I bought bottled water and kept it with me constantly, never leaving it unattended. Within 10 days of changing my consumption patterns, my symptoms began to improve. The fog lifted from my mind. The the persistent nausea subsided, and my energy levels started to rebound. Sarah noticed the change and seemed concerned rather than pleased by my improvement. "You're looking better," she commented one morning, her tone casual but her eyes watchful. "Still feeling tired, though?" "On and off," I lied. "Good days and bad. Today's better than yesterday." She nodded, seemingly reassured that her poison was still working, just more slowly than anticipated. That evening, I found the dose in my tea had noticeably increased. The lab later confirmed it was nearly double the previous amounts that my second step was contacting a lawyer specializing in both criminal and divorce cases. I met with Elaine Costello in a coffee shop 20 miles from our home, far from anywhere Sarah might have acquaintances. I brought copies of everything I'd gathered so far: the journal entries, emails, test results, and financial documents showing the unauthorized insurance policy and offshore accounts. Elaine listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, she said simply, "This is the most calculated attempted murder I've seen in 20 years of practice." "What should I do?" I asked, the reality of my situation hitting me anew as I heard someone else acknowledge it. "Document everything. And I mean everything," she advised. "We need to build an airtight case before involving the authorities. These types of crimes, domestic poisonings, can be difficult to prosecute without overwhelming evidence." Following her guidance, I set up a comprehensive surveillance system in our home. I installed cameras disguised as smoke detectors, air fresheners, and ordinary household objects. They covered the kitchen, living areas, and even our bedroom, anywhere Sarah might prepare or administer poison. "Is this legal?" I had asked Elaine. "In your own home, when you have reasonable cause to believe your life is in danger?" "Yes," she confirmed. "Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recordings, and there's established precedent for self-defense surveillance in cases of suspected domestic crimes." Within days, the cameras captured Sarah adding substances to my food and drinks on multiple occasions. The footage was chilling in its mundanity, my wife humming softly while measuring poison into my evening tea, checking the dose with scientific precision, then stirring until it dissolved completely. Sometimes she would pause, staring thoughtfully at the cup as if contemplating the effect it would have on me. Once, she even smiled slightly before arranging her features into an expression of loving concern and bringing the contaminated drink to my office. "Made you some chamomile," she would say, setting it beside my keyboard. "You seem tense." "Thanks, you're the best," I would reply, my skin crawling even as I forced a grateful smile that I maintained a detailed log of every incident, noting times, dates, and exactly what food or drink had been tampered with. Each contaminated sample was carefully preserved as evidence. I arranged for a full toxicology screening with my doctor, Dr. Patrick Campbell, revealing the poisoning that had been occurring. When he saw the results, his face paled. "Michael, these thallium levels would be concerning even in someone with occupational exposure. For someone like you, they indicate deliberate poisoning," he said gravely. "I'm legally obligated to report this to authorities. I need a few more days first," I explained, revealing enough of the situation to gain his reluctant cooperation. "I'm building a case. Lives depend on it, including mine." Dr. Campbell agreed to delay reporting for exactly 1 week, no longer. "But you need to begin treatment immediately," he insisted, prescribing medication to help eliminate the toxin from my system. While gathering evidence, I maintained a normal facade at home, acting slightly more ill than I actually felt, giving Sarah the impression her plan was working. I even made a show of updating my will, appearing to leave everything to her without restrictions. "It's just precautionary," I told her when she asked why I was reviewing our legal documents. "With how I've been feeling lately, I want to make sure everything's in order." The flash of anticipation in her eyes was quickly masked by performed concern. "Don't talk like that," she said, squeezing my hand. "You're going to be fine." "Of course, I will," I replied, patting her hand reassuringly. "Just being thorough. You know me." During this time, I connected with a financial forensic investigator recommended by Elaine. Melissa Hargrove was a former FBI agent specializing in financial crimes who now worked in the private sector. She helped uncover the full extent of the offshore accounts Sarah had set up, as well as communications with her paramour James, who turned out to be not just her lover, but someone with a history of insurance fraud. He's done this before, Melissa told me, sliding a folder across the table during our third meeting. Inside was a dossier on James Dixon, age 41, previously married twice. Both ex-wives had experienced mysterious health crises that had eventually resulted in divorce rather than death. No charges had ever been filed, but the pattern was unmistakable. He's getting bolder, and your wife appears to be a more willing accomplice than his previous partners. Through Melissa's investigation, we discovered that James had actually met Sarah not at a conference as their email suggested, but through an encrypted online forum called Exit Strategy, a disturbing digital space where unhappy spouses discussed ways to end their marriages through their partner's deaths rather than divorce. These forums exist in the dark corners of the internet, Melissa explained. They start under the guise of support groups for people in unhappy marriages, then gradually introduce the idea that eliminating a spouse is simpler than dividing assets or paying alimony. This revelation sickened me more than anything else. The premeditation wasn't just months in the making. It had been fostered through an entire community dedicated to planning the perfect murder. Sarah hadn't accidentally fallen into an affair that led to a desperate plan. She had actively sought out ways to kill me and found both methodology and a partner through this disturbing network. The hardest part of this period was pretending everything was normal, coming home to someone who was actively trying to kill me, and smiling through dinners where I had to secretly dispose of the food she prepared. Each night, lying beside her in bed, I would wait until her breathing grew steady with sleep before slipping away to document new evidence or communicate with my growing team of professionals helping build the case. There were moments when the performance became almost unbearable. 3 weeks into my evidence gathering, on a rare weekend when Sarah wasn't meeting James under some fabricated excuse, she suggested a movie night, one of our old traditions. We sat on the couch together watching The Princess Bride, a film we had loved since our early dating days. When the famous As You Wish scene played, Sarah rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I love you that much, you know." I forced myself to put my arm around her shoulders, murmuring agreement while my mind screamed at the perversion of this moment. Her invoking one of cinema's great love stories while actively poisoning me. That night, I slipped out to the bathroom and vomited from the sheer emotional strain of the deception. The next morning, Sarah noticed the dark circles under my eyes. "You're looking worse," she said, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from her voice. "Maybe we should go back to Dr. Campbell. I've got an appointment next week," I assured her. What I didn't mention was that the appointment was to document my improving condition now that I was no longer consuming her poisoned concoctions, building further evidence of the correlation between my mysterious illness and what I ate or drank at home. By the 5th week of my counter-operation, my team had assembled an airtight case. We had video evidence of Sarah poisoning my food and drinks on 17 separate occasions, laboratory confirmation of thallium in preserved samples, medical documentation of my declining health while consuming contaminated items, and subsequent improvement when I stopped, digital evidence from Sarah's devices showing her research into poisons, symptoms and methods of administration, financial records revealing the unauthorized insurance policy, offshore accounts, and preparations for disappearing, communication records between Sarah and James detailing their relationship and murderous conspiracy. Background information on James showing a pattern of similar behavior with previous spouses. We're ready, Elaine confirmed during our final preparatory meeting. The district attorney has reviewed our preliminary evidence and is prepared to move forward with charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and assault. They'll be arrested simultaneously to prevent either from fleeing or destroying additional evidence. We set a date for the arrests, December 23rd, just 2 days before the health crisis Sarah and James had planned for me. The timing was deliberate, close enough to their deadline that all preparations would be in place, providing maximum evidence, but not so close that I remained in danger. With the legal proceedings organized, I faced a personal decision. How did I want Sarah to understand the magnitude of her betrayal before justice took its course? Did I confront her privately? Did I expose her publicly? Or did I simply let the police arrival be her first indication that her plan had failed? After much consideration, I decided that before the legal system took over, I wanted Sarah to face The social consequences of her actions, to have our friends and family witness the evidence of her betrayal firsthand. Perhaps it was petty, but after months of psychological torture, I needed this catharsis, this moment of seeing the truth, laid bare before those who had loved and trusted her as I once had. Before involving the authorities, I decided Sarah needed to face the social consequences of her actions. I organized a family dinner at our home for December 22nd, the night before the planned arrests. I invited her parents, Robert and Elizabeth Winters, my parents, James and Catherine Brennan, my brother Thomas and his wife Claire, and our closest friends, Dave and his wife Megan, plus two other couples who had been with us since the beginning of our relationship. The invitation was positioned as a pre-Christmas gathering to bring everyone together since we've all been so busy. Sarah was initially reluctant, claiming she had too much year-end work, but I gently insisted. "It's been ages since we've seen your parents," I said, "and mine are flying in specially. Just a few hours, then you can get back to your projects." She eventually agreed, though I noticed her texting furiously afterward, presumably updating James about this complication in their timeline. The day of the dinner arrived. I had arranged for a catering service to prepare and serve the meal, explaining to Sarah that I wanted to reduce her stress given her workload. The real reason, of course, was to ensure the food wasn't tampered with. I suggested she take the afternoon to visit her salon and relax before guests arrived, getting her out of the house while I made final preparations. Once she left, I set up my laptop to connect wirelessly to our television and tested the presentation I had prepared. I also placed sealed evidence packages in my office safe, copies of everything that would be presented to the police the following day, ready to hand to Sarah's father, a respected surgeon who valued integrity above all else. Guests began arriving. At 6 p.m., Sarah greeted everyone warmly, the perfect hostess in a burgundy dress she had purchased specifically for the occasion. She moved through the pre-dinner mingling with practiced charm, complimenting my mother's new hairstyle, discussing hospital politics with her father, refilling wine glasses before they were empty. Watching her perform this role, the devoted wife in our loving home, knowing what I now knew, was surreal. There was a moment when our eyes met across the room, and she smiled with what appeared to be genuine affection. For a fleeting second, I almost doubted the evidence amassed against her. Almost. During dinner, conversation flowed naturally. Sarah's mother talked about their plans to tour wine country in the spring. Dave recounted an amusing story about his daughter's school play. My brother described the renovation challenges in their century-old house. Through it all, Sarah maintained perfect composure, laughing at the right moments, asking thoughtful follow-up questions, occasionally touching my hand affectionately as dessert was being served. I excused myself to take medication, explaining to our guests that I'd been dealing with some health issues lately. Sarah's expression flickered momentarily, concern overlaid with something darker, before she composed herself and added, "He's been so run down lately. We're still trying to figure out what's wrong." The lie slid from her lips effortlessly, her tone perfectly calibrated to convey loving concern. Several guests offered sympathetic murmurs and suggestions for specialists or alternative treatments. "Actually," I said, returning to the dining room, remote control in hand, "I think we've figured out exactly what's wrong." I clicked the button, and the television screen came to life, displaying the title slide of my presentation, "Sarah and the Poisoning, a Timeline." The room fell silent. Sarah froze, fork halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting from the screen to my face. "Michael, what is this?" she asked, her voice controlled but with an underlying tremor. "The truth," I replied simply, advancing to the first slide, a split screen showing her adding something to my protein shake, alongside the laboratory report confirming thallium presence. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically presented the evidence. Video clips of Sarah poisoning my food interspersed with medical reports showing corresponding thallium levels, screenshots of her communications with James planning my death, financial documents revealing unauthorized insurance policies and offshore accounts, travel arrangements for their post-murder disappearance. I kept my tone measured and factual, like a prosecutor presenting evidence rather than a betrayed husband unleashing fury. The controlled delivery made the presentation all the more devastating. There was no emotional outburst for Sarah to dismiss or manipulate, The reaction in the room evolved from confusion to disbelief to horror. Sarah's mother began weeping silently halfway through. Her father sat rigid, his surgeon's composure cracking. Only when the medical reports appeared, confirming the deliberate poisoning. My parents moved to stand behind my chair, my father's hand gripping my shoulder so tightly it almost hurt. Dave, my oldest friend, stared at Sarah with naked revulsion, while his wife Megan clutched her napkin to her mouth, as if fighting nausea. The other couples sat motionless, witnessing the unraveling of what they had believed was an ideal marriage. When I finished the presentation, the silence was absolute. All eyes turned to Sarah, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout, her expression shifting from shock to calculation to something approaching resignation. She attempted to deny everything, claiming I had fabricated the evidence out of paranoia. "He's been acting strangely for months," she said, looking around the table for support. "This is clearly some kind of psychotic break. The medications he's on, they can cause paranoid delusions." No one responded. The evidence had been too comprehensive, too irrefutable. Her father was the first to speak directly to her. "Did you do this, Sarah?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you try to murder your husband?" "Dad, of course not," she replied, reaching for his hand. He pulled away. "I've read thousands of toxicology reports in my career," he said, his voice strengthening. "I know what thallium poisoning looks like. I know what those levels mean." He stood abruptly. "I don't know who you are anymore." Her mother followed, unable to even look at her daughter. They moved to my side of the table, physically and symbolically separating themselves from Sarah. One by one, our friends stood and left without a word to Sarah, though several embraced me with whispered apologies, as if they should somehow have seen what was happening. The most powerful moment came when Sarah's own sister Claire, who had arrived late and witnessed only the last half of the presentation, stood up, looked her in the eye, and said, "I don't know who you are anymore," before walking out with her husband, Sarah. Increasingly desperate as the room emptied, turned to my parents. "Catherine, James, you know me. You know I would never." My mother cut her off with a raised hand. "We welcomed you into our family," she said, her voice shaking. "We trusted you with our son's life." She couldn't continue, turning away as tears overwhelmed her. My father, normally a gentle man who avoided confrontation, fixed Sarah with a stare of such cold fury that she physically recoiled. "The police will be here tomorrow," he stated flatly. "Pack what you need for tonight and get out of my son's house." "You can't make me leave," Sarah protested, her composure finally cracking. "This is my home too." "Actually," I interjected, sliding a document across the table. "As of this morning, it's not. The property has been transferred to a trust as part of an asset protection strategy initiated after I discovered your first attempt to poison me. You no longer have legal residence here." Sarah's professional reputation was shattered when news inevitably spread through our community. By midnight, her company had been informed of the pending charges. They issued a statement placing her on immediate administrative leave pending investigation, as handling other people's finances requires absolute trust, before she left that night, taking refuge at a hotel rather than facing her parents. Sarah made one last attempt to manipulate me. Cornering me in the kitchen as the last guests departed, she whispered urgently, "Michael, we can work this out." I was confused, under pressure from James. He threatened me, forced me to participate. I was afraid to tell you. I regarded her calmly. 3 weeks ago, you wrote to him. "I can't wait to watch the light fade from his eyes, knowing we're finally free." That doesn't sound threatened or forced to me. The mask dropped completely then. Her face transformed into something I didn't recognize. Cold, calculating, furious. "You were never supposed to be smart enough to figure it out," she hissed. "Always so trusting, so pathetically devoted. Do you know how suffocating that is? How boring." "I'm sorry I wasn't exciting enough to keep you from becoming a murderer," I replied evenly. "The police will be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I suggest you use the time to find a very good criminal attorney." As she gathered some belongings under the watchful eye of my brother, who had returned to ensure she didn't destroy evidence, I felt an odd sense of calm. The performance was over. The truth was known, and whatever happened next would be guided by justice rather than deception. With the social foundation laid, I proceeded with legal action. Working with my attorneys, I filed for divorce citing attempted murder and submitted all evidence to the district attorney's office. The wheels of justice began turning swiftly, propelled by the comprehensive case we had built and the serious nature of the crimes. The police arrested Sarah at her hotel the following morning at precisely 9 a.m., as promised. They simultaneously apprehended James Dixon at his apartment in Cambridge. Local news outlets picked up the story immediately. The attempted murder for insurance plot was too sensational to ignore, especially given Sarah's position as a trusted financial advisor with wealthy clients and James's connections in investment banking. During the investigation, detectives discovered this wasn't James's first attempt at such a scheme. He had been married briefly in his early 20s to a woman who had experienced similar, mysterious health issues before they divorced. Though never charged, police in Connecticut had flagged the case as suspicious. A subsequent relationship had followed the same pattern: illness, insurance policy increases, followed by a breakup when the woman's family became suspicious. James had refined his approach with each relationship, becoming more careful about evidence. But Sarah had been his most willing and active accomplice. The district attorney assigned Alexandra Morales, a veteran prosecutor with numerous high-profile convictions, to the case. She met with me privately before the arraignment. "This is one of the most methodically documented cases of attempted murder I've ever seen," she told me, reviewing the evidence files. "Most victims don't realize what's happening until it's too late, if ever. Your thoroughness in gathering evidence, while still pretending ignorance, was remarkable." "I had good help," I acknowledged, gesturing to Elaine who sat beside me. "Still, most people would have confronted their spouse immediately or fled the home," Alexandra noted. "Continuing to live with someone you knew was poisoning you, maintaining that deception while building a case. That took extraordinary courage and self-control." The arraignment was brief but dramatic. Sarah and James, in matching orange jumpsuits, stood before Judge Harrison Winters, no relation to Sarah, though the coincidence was noted by several news outlets. Their attorneys entered not guilty pleas despite the overwhelming evidence. Sarah maintained her composure throughout the proceeding, her expression neutral, occasionally leaning to whisper to her attorney, one of Boston's most expensive criminal defense lawyers, retained by her parents despite their personal devastation. James appeared more affected, his hands visibly shaking as the charges were read: attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated assault, insurance fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Bail was denied for both defendants. The judge citing flight risk, given the extensive evidence of overseas accounts and preparations for disappearance. They were remanded to separate facilities: Sarah to the Women's Correctional Center in Framingham, James to the Suffolk County House of Correction. The pretrial period lasted 4 months, during which their attorneys filed numerous motions attempting to exclude various pieces of evidence. Judge Winters methodically rejected each challenge, finding that all surveillance had been legally obtained and all forensic evidence properly handled. The defense also sought to have the cases tried separately, hoping to create reasonable doubt by having each defendant blame the other for initiating the plot. This strategy failed when prosecutors presented the extensive messaging history showing mutual planning and enthusiasm. Meanwhile, James was under pressure from mounting evidence against him. Investigators had uncovered additional concerning patterns in his past relationships, including suspicious investment accounts connected to his previous wife's insurance policies. Facing the possibility of multiple charges across several states, he accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Sarah in exchange for a reduced sentence on some counts. His testimony was devastating. Over 2 days on the witness stand, he revealed their entire plan in excruciating detail, including how they had met through an online forum for disgruntled spouses and gradually developed their criminal conspiracy. He described Sarah as the more enthusiastic partner, particularly regarding the methods of poisoning. She had researched several options, he testified, avoiding looking at Sarah across the courtroom. She chose thallium because it would mimic other illnesses and build slowly in his system. She was proud of finding a supplier through the dark web who wouldn't ask questions. When asked if he had pressured or threatened Sarah to participate, as her defense had suggested, James laughed mirthlessly. "She was the one who first suggested we could solve our problem permanently. I had been thinking divorce. she went straight to murder. She said divorce would be too expensive and messy. Death would be cleaner. Sarah's defense strategy shifted. After James's testimony, attempting to portray her as a victim of psychological manipulation by a charismatic predator with a history of exploiting vulnerable women. Her attorney, Bradford Mills, called a forensic psychologist who testified that Sarah displayed symptoms consistent with coercive control and emotional abuse. However, this narrative crumbled under cross-examination when prosecutor Morales introduced Sarah's private journal entries describing her contempt for me and her excitement about the murder plan, writings that showed calculation rather than coercion. The forensic psychologist was forced to concede that the writings did not support a theory of psychological manipulation. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from medical experts confirming the thallium poisoning, financial investigators documenting the complex money trails, and digital forensics specialists verifying the authenticity of electronic communications. I testified for 2 full days, describing the gradual realization that my wife was poisoning me, the evidence I had gathered, and the elaborate pretense I had maintained while building the case. Sarah maintained her innocence throughout, claiming, I had set her up due to my own affair, which was completely fabricated. She testified in her own defense, delivering a performance of tearful confusion and betrayal that might have been convincing had it not been directly contradicted by video evidence, medical reports, financial records, electronic communications, and her own writings. The most compelling pieces of evidence were toxicology reports showing thallium poisoning and its correlation with periods when I was consuming food and drink at home, high-definition video evidence of Sarah administering the poison on multiple occasions, laboratory confirmation of thallium. In preserved food and drink samples, financial records showing the purchase of thallium through cryptocurrency transactions traced to Sarah's devices, the second insurance policy, with demonstrably forged signatures, detailed electronic communications between Sarah and James planning the murder, including specific discussions of dosages and timeline, the offshore accounts and preparations for assuming new identities, testimony from the lab technician who had analyzed the protein powder I had brought in, confirming lethal levels of thallium. Sarah's own journal entries documenting my symptoms with clinical detachment and occasional satisfaction during closing arguments. Prosecutor Morales displayed a timeline showing the meticulous planning that had gone into the murder attempt, contrasting it with photos of Sarah and me from happier times. This case represents the ultimate betrayal, she told the jury. While Michael Brennan believed he was building a life with his partner, she was calculating his death. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a coldly executed plan to murder an innocent man for financial gain, carried out over months by the person he trusted most in the world. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts for both Sarah and James, on the charges he hadn't pled to. As the foreman read the verdicts, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what could have been, for the life and love I had believed was real. Sentencing followed 2 weeks later. Judge Winters delivered a scathing assessment before announcing Sarah's punishment. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many cases of domestic violence, but few as calculated and cold-blooded as this one. You weaponize the intimacy and trust of marriage to systematically poison your husband, all while maintaining a facade of loving concern. This court sentences you to 25 years in state prison for attempted murder, with additional concurrent terms. For the other charges, without possibility of parole for 18 years. James received 18 years with the possibility of parole after 12, his sentence reduced in exchange for his cooperation. However, prosecutors in Connecticut and New Jersey were already preparing charges related to his previous relationships, making early release unlikely. In the divorce proceedings, which proceeded simultaneously with the criminal case, the judge granted me all of our joint assets, citing the criminal conviction as grounds for the uneven distribution. The insurance companies launched their own fraud investigations, cooperating fully with law enforcement and providing additional evidence that strengthened the criminal case. The victims of the Exit Strategy Forum, the online group where Sarah and James had met and refined their plan, were identified and contacted by authorities. Several other cases of suspicious illnesses in seemingly healthy spouses were reopened, leading to 3 additional arrests in similar cases across the country. The forum administrators were charged with conspiracy and incitement to commit murder, though they claimed the site was merely a space for fantasy and venting. Throughout the legal proceedings, I maintained as much privacy as possible, declining interview requests and avoiding media attention. My focus was on healing, physically from the poisoning and emotionally from the betrayal. The criminal and divorce cases had consumed nearly a year of my life, a year spent reliving the nightmare through testimony, evidence review, and cross-examination. When it was finally over, when Sarah was led away in handcuffs to begin her sentence, I felt neither victory nor closure, only the exhaustion of someone who has survived something they never should have had to face. It's been 2 years since Sarah's sentencing, and my life has transformed completely. The recovery from the poisoning took nearly 8 months of specialized treatment. Thallium, being a heavy metal, had accumulated in my system over time, damaging multiple organs. My doctors say I'm fortunate to have discovered the poisoning when I did. A few more months could have caused permanent neurological damage or worse. Even now, I have some lingering effects, occasional tremors in my hands, sensitivity to certain foods, fatigue that hits unexpectedly. My doctors say these symptoms should eventually resolve completely, but the timeline is uncertain. The physical healing, challenging as it has been, proved far easier than the emotional recovery. How do you learn to trust again after discovering the person who shared your bed was systematically trying to kill you? How do you look at a glass of water or a plate of food without wondering, however irrationally, if it's safe? These questions dominated my first year after the trial that I sold our house in Boston. Too many painful memories haunted every room. I couldn't walk into the kitchen without seeing Sarah measuring poison into my protein shake. I couldn't sleep in our bedroom without remembering her watching me as the toxin took effect. The property sold quickly, despite disclosure laws requiring me to inform potential buyers about the crimes that had occurred there. Apparently, some people find such notoriety fascinating rather than disturbing. With the proceeds from the house sale and the assets awarded in the divorce, I had the financial freedom to start over completely. I'd always been drawn to the mountains, finding peace in their ancient stability and perspective-altering scale. After researching various locations, I chose Boulder, Colorado, a vibrant city with tech opportunities nestled against the stunning Flatiron formations that I purchased a modern cabin-style home on 3 acres just outside the city limits. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame views of the mountains, bringing natural beauty into every room. It's open and airy, the opposite of the traditional New England architecture that had become associated with deception in my mind. Professional reinvention followed. The physical relocation. I left the corporate cybersecurity world to start a consulting firm specializing in helping individuals protect themselves from fraud and identity theft. The irony isn't lost on me. I couldn't identify the fraud happening in my own home, yet. Now I help others secure their personal information and finances. Perhaps that's precisely why I'm effective. I understand viscerally how vulnerability feels that MY Company, Vigilant Shield Consulting, has grown from a solo operation to a team of 6 specialists in just 18 months. We work primarily with domestic violence survivors, elderly clients, vulnerable to scams, and individuals who have experienced identity theft or financial exploitation. Turning my painful experience into something that helps others has been the most healing aspect of my recovery. Sarah is serving her sentence in a maximum security women's facility in Massachusetts. I've had no contact with her since the trial, though I've heard through mutual acquaintances that she still maintains her innocence to anyone who will listen. She has apparently become something of a cause célèbre among certain true crime enthusiasts who believe she was framed or coerced by James, a narrative thoroughly debunked by the evidence but kept alive through speculative podcasts and social media groups. Her parents, once close to me, have moved to Arizona, effectively starting their own new life. Elizabeth, Sarah's mother, sent me a heartfelt letter of apologies 6 months after the sentencing, writing, "We raised her, loved her, thought we knew her. The guilt of having created someone capable of such calculated cruelty will never leave us." I responded with assurances that they weren't responsible for their adult daughter's choices, but we haven't maintained contact. Some wounds are too deep for casual interaction. James, meanwhile, is facing additional charges in Connecticut related to his first wife's mysterious illnesses. My testimony about the poisoning methods used in my case provided investigators with new avenues to explore in that cold case. He's serving his sentence in federal prison, having been transferred from state custody when evidence of interstate conspiracy emerged. His cooperation continues, providing information about other members of the exit strategy forum in exchange for considerations in his sentencing for the additional charges. The financial aftermath of Sarah and James's crimes extended beyond criminal penalties. Civil suits have been filed against both by the insurance companies they attempted to defraud. James faces financial ruin from these actions. Any assets he might have hidden have been identified and frozen. Sarah's professional licenses have been permanently revoked, and she has been barred from working in financial services or insurance for life. The most unexpected development in my story has been meeting Elena Suarez, a prosecutor who worked on a separate fraud case related to the forum where Sarah and James had met. Our paths crossed at a conference on domestic financial abuse where I was invited to speak about my experience. Elena approached me afterward, not with the morbid curiosity I'd grown accustomed to deflecting, but with thoughtful questions about improving victim identification in similar cases. That we connected over coffee to discuss the case and found we had a genuine connection beyond our professional interests. Elena understood trauma and recovery from both personal and professional perspectives. Her mother had survived an abusive marriage before Elena was born. After a year of friendship, during which she never once rushed or pressured me through my healing process, we've recently started dating. Elena understands my trust issues and has been incredibly patient as I work through them with my therapist. Our relationship progresses on my timeline, with open communication about triggers and boundaries. When I struggled to accept a glass of water from her hand during our third date, freezing momentarily as unwelcome memories surfaced, she simply placed the glass on the table and said, "It's there when you're ready." That small moment of compassionate understanding meant more than any grand romantic gesture could have. Cooper, my golden retriever who witnessed the darkest period of my life, is still with me and has been my most loyal companion throughout this ordeal. Now 7 years old, he's adjusted beautifully to Colorado life, chasing squirrels through our property and accompanying me on weekend hikes through the mountain trails. These outings have been crucial for rebuilding my physical strength and finding peace in natural surroundings where human deception seems distant and irrelevant. My family has been an unwavering source of support. My parents, now in their 70s, visit quarterly from Maine, marveling at the mountain views and helping me plant a new garden, this one without painful associations. My brother calls weekly, a ritual that began during the investigation and continued long after it became unnecessary, simply because we rediscovered the value of regular connection. Old friendships have evolved in various ways. Dave, my oldest friend who inadvertently helped uncover Sarah's lies by noticing her fabricated company dinner, moved his family to Denver last year, partly to be closer to me. Other friends from Boston visit occasionally, though our interactions are sometimes tinged with the awkwardness that comes from witnessing someone's life implode and rebuild. New friendships have formed more easily here in Colorado, with people who know my story only if I choose to share it. I've learned that while betrayal can destroy your perception of reality, it doesn't have to destroy your capacity for happiness or trust. The road back is longer and more winding than I could have imagined, full of unexpected triggers, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but it is navigable with the right support. Surrounding yourself with genuine people, finding purpose in helping others, and allowing yourself to heal at your own pace makes the journey possible, if not always comfortable. The experience has fundamentally changed how I view human connection. I'm more cautious, certainly, but also more appreciative of authentic relationships. When someone shows me genuine care or concern without agenda, I recognize it as the precious gift it is. I no longer take loyalty for granted, and I'm more attentive to the subtle indicators of character that I previously overlooked. If my story helps even one person recognize the warning signs I missed, or gives someone the courage to investigate their suspicions when something feels wrong in their relationship, then sharing it has been worth revisiting these painful memories. Trust your instincts. That vague discomfort you can't quite name might be your subconscious processing inconsistencies your conscious mind wants to explain away. Most importantly, remember that survival itself is victory. Whether you're facing betrayal, abuse, manipulation, or any other form of harm from someone you trusted, making it through with your capacity for kindness and connection intact is an achievement worthy of celebration. The life I have now isn't the one I planned with Sarah in those early, hopeful years of our marriage. It's different, shaped by trauma, but not defined by it. There are still difficult days when memories intrude or trust feels impossible. But there are also mornings when I wake to mountain views and feel profound gratitude for second chances. Afternoons spent helping clients protect themselves from harm, and evenings sharing quiet moments with Elena and Cooper beside a fireplace in a home where I feel completely safe. Stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and remember that justice, while sometimes slow, can be thorough. Healing follows its own timeline, rarely linear but always possible. And life after betrayal, while forever altered, can eventually become not just survivable, but genuinely beautiful in its own way. That if you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience in the face of profound betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.